Alrighty, how are we doing here in the SDG Action Zone? Well, that we must not be doing very well. How are we doing in the SDG Action Zone? I want you to get hyped because the next few sessions are going to be nonstop and they're going to be amazing and you're going to wish you had more energy than you do right now. So, leading into this session, be ready to post, be ready to hashtag all your posts. If you don't know the hashtags right now, I cannot believe that, but I'll tell you again. It's hashtag 4People4Planet, hashtag Act4SDGs, and hashtag SDG Action Zone. And we are here to talk about transformative action, and this is perhaps one of my favorite case studies of all of this action in action. This is an SDG activation that I'm just going to read the stats, maybe the most important stat, which is an SDG activation that was the most high-profile media moment for the goals since they were launched in 2015. And our speakers who are here to chat about it a bit more are a man we already know and love, Dauda Jabarte, the global head of the SDG Strategy Hub. Next to him is CEO of TBWA, a global communications agency, Kimberly Wells. And TBWA's Chief Creative Officer, Paul Reardon. And before we launch in, we're actually going to watch a little video of that most high-profile moment for the goals since their launch in 2015. So get ready.
Climate activist Greta Thunberg arrived in New York Harbor Wednesday, ending her 2-week trek across the Atlantic.
Nearly 3,000 miles.
Greta Thunberg seglat mot USA.
The UN greeted her arrival with a flotilla of 17 boats for their Sustainable Development Goals.
For climate summit after zero carbon boat
Greta
trip.
Thunberg arrives in New York and is received by a flotilla of the UN.
Sails into New York City after a 2-week journey across the Atlantic.
Each branded with a Sustainable Development Goal.
Someone needs to say stop. Someone needs to say we need to change. She's doing that very loudly. The 17 goals are very important. And I think if we manage to get through all of them, we'll get somewhere.
Amazing initiative that the UN developed with the SDG goals. All the club boats are screaming hurrah.
And I think all the kids out there think she's a rock star, and I think she's a rock star. I think I want to be her when I grow up.
You got to clap for that. So, Dauda, it doesn't even do this justice to call it a case study, but talk to us about how this particular SDG activation came together. How did it happen?
First of all, thank you all for joining us. Thanks, Indira. My boss and I and some other colleagues were invited to the Deputy Secretary General's office one day and said, we need to raise the profiles of the Sustainable Development Goals. What is the plan? We looked at each other and went, excuse me? And we hashed out this plan. We jumped on the phone with a couple of partners that we work very, very closely with. Kimberly was on that call, and we delivered a brief to try and help raise the profile in the hearts, minds, and eyes of everyone in and around New York, on social media, and around the world to basically ladder up into something bigger than the sum of the parts. We then received an amazing brief. Kimberly put her hand up and said, we will throw our agency capacity and resources to helping you develop this and do it. And they developed a brief in record speed with the UN being the client, effectively, and the Sustainable Development Goals being the referent of what it is we needed to propagate and get out to the world. We went in and briefed the Secretary General with the Deputy Secretary General. We had a list of crazy ideas that were audacious and impossible. This is one of them. And this is the thing out of all of the different activations that we had, and it ranged from this flotilla to putting a cape on Lady Liberty, to another.
An SDG cape?
An SDG cape, of course.
So next year.
We'll see.
Yes, absolutely.
You heard it here
That's
first.
2020.
And out of all of the different activations, this is the one that he had commented on that he thought would be impossible to do. We all left the room wanting to do nothing but this one. And it's the first one that happened because of the timing of her arrival, and it accelerated everything forward, and we were able to execute it. The space that you're in, the SDG Action Zone, is part of that activation strategy as well. It was, again, physical. It was digital, and Paul and Kimberly will get into that. And the physical part of it included the very space that you're here in, to provide a space and a platform for partners, for collaborators, for people that are working in sustainable development to really, really come, exchange thoughts, network, figure out how to move the needle, and really, really get us to the exponential level that we need to see with regard to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Which is a question of impact, right? So we know how we felt watching that. Do we have sort of tangible versions of impact beyond
We do.
our hearts in here?
Yeah, we do. Nadira, let's have a look at a few of them. So starting with the tweets that went out on the day when the flotilla met Greta. She was aware, as her whole team were, that the flotilla was happening. They were incredibly supportive of it, which was really important. And so she was able to tweet on board the Malizia, her yacht, as all the boats met her. That had immediate impact and garnered the world's attention. You can see there on the right, that's a tweet from the Secretary General of the United Nations, which went on to become his most popular tweet ever. So the impact from a social point...
So say that again. The SG's most popular tweet ever was that one right there.
The Secretary General's most popular tweet ever was the flotilla and Greta's arrival, which was fantastic.
You can clap for that. Talk about raising the profile of the SDGs.
Yeah, it was great. And I think it's probably an important point to make now that this isn't just our story, and just like the Sustainable Development Goals, they're not just any one person or group of people's goals. This story belongs to absolutely everybody. So Greta's role in this had started well before, clearly, we even thought of a flotilla welcoming her. Mm-hmm. So I think the success of the SG's tweet was sort of hugely dedicated to Greta, but the flotilla was just a lovely way to get the profile of all 17 goals coming through. Taking that further, we're able to get all 17 goals on the Nasdaq Billboard and the Thomson Reuters Billboard in Times Square. So they were up there for a period of 3 days. Every hour, a new goal was there. And there you can see the DSG in front of some of the iconography of the goals. That was all donated free, and that was amazing to get in what is arguably the most high-profile outdoor advertising placement in the world. Following on, there was further impacts. Link NYC originally had been very gracious in donating a whole lot of signs around the UNHQ. When they saw the impact and the, I guess, energy around the flotilla, they said, I think we want to help even more than this. And then so we went on to put further messaging about the state of all of the goals around all 5 boroughs. And at last count, I think it was about 2,000 screens.
Sorry, can I just jump in there? One of the skippers in the flotilla actually was a senior leader at Intersection, which is the company that runs Link NYC. And what it was is he was so inspired by it, he called me without me soliciting him and saying, how can we help do this better and bigger? He then connected us with their public engagement director. We had a conversation, and this turned into a further activation and them offering up the majority of their screens, of which they have 2,000 in and around New York City, and are growing to have more in other cities, which may help us next year.
And I have to say, too, this is layered, because sometimes the criticism of our campaigns, and all campaigns, is that the top might work, but then the middle doesn't work, and when you get down to sourcing, you have real problems. And I love talking to these guys about the flotilla and every element. Can you talk a little bit, Kim, about like who was on the flotilla, who was on the boats?
The flotilla was run by a full female steward. Mm-hmm. And that was really important to the sailing community when they came together, that we had women run all the ships that went out, which was fantastic. And that was as much as homage to Greta as it was obviously to gender equality and raising the profile of females in the sailing community.
And these guys have no sailing background.
We have zero sailing.
We do now.
So think about what that meant, actually. So in this conversation, as it's all evolving, and it's amazing to hear about now, and in retrospect, we can see how it all naturally evolved. But in that process, what was most surprising to you guys as it was coming together? What's really stuck with you?
Yeah, I think, we should start with Goal 17. You can probably hear an Australian accent, also an Australian accent. We're not aliens in New York. We do live in Australia. So this whole effort was really pulled together on the basis of a group of people bringing collective passion and just not being prepared to accept no. And it kind of got to the point partway through where we just sort of looked at each other and wondered whether or not we'd just become belligerent teenagers, because when people were saying no, and they did say no, and I won't name names, but there was certainly a point in the process where we had a sailing club, we had 17 boats, we had 17 sails, and then they asked us for a significant sum of money, which we didn't have. So
at the last hour, when we're actually organizing the collection of the sails themselves.
Yeah, so this lived and died 1,000 times, and
at least.
Yeah.
We had a saying that, in fact, Dowder came up with this equation that no plus no to the power of 10 equals 17 boats on the New York Harbor. And that was one of the kind of mantras that we kept going with. And another learning was that the road to yes is paved with 1,000 no's. And I think if you look at the partners that were on this, there's some global organisations there, but we found that most importantly, there are some grassroots community groups without which this never would have happened. So when you think of sailing, you could be forgiven for saying, oh, okay, that's a mega rich sport for the elite, but this was actually the opposite. In fact, Commodore Nitzan Levy, an Israeli who came to America, started a local sailing community with the whole purpose of getting people who don't have bucket loads of cash out on the water to enjoy it. So we had grassroots sailing communities rallying together and mobilising behind a passion point to make this happen, as well as international communications organisations and clearly the United Nations.
And I just want to jump in. When we lost the 17 boats and 17 sails, the deputy flotilla captain, who's actually seated in the fourth row, Barbara, had reached out to me the week before. I had written to her and said, no, we're sorted. That call came Saturday afternoon. We were supposed to pick up the sails that same day. I called her at 9, I think it was 8:59 a.m. on Monday morning, only because I didn't have her cell phone to be able to call her. She wasn't answering her phone. I literally went to the directory of her office and went down the list to call everybody that would answer their phone, to go and find her physically. They went to go find her. She goes, yeah, no worries, we got it. We have 14 boats, sorted. Excuse me? So we had 14 boats with no sails. We were working and hatching on a plan to physically make the sails. And to answer your earlier question, Nadira, we had no idea until we were actually coming back on the boats whether it would be success or not. It literally was stormy. We left. There were about 30 people on land. We had the 18 boats actually, in the water. Had no idea whether they would make it. Had no idea whether we would be able to keep up. Had no idea whether the militia would just race by once and let that be the case. And it was a matter of coordinating and leveraging the opportunity ahead of us. Militia was leveraging the opportunity of the flotilla as well. So it was this really, really sweet spot of mutual benefit in terms of linking the Sustainable Development Goals to all of the other elements with regard to climate. Initially, the climate discussion and discourse was taking a lot of the oxygen and energy around this week. And I think we did a great job in linking all 17 goals back to that incident and that opportunity.
So the road to SDG action is not smooth, right? It takes perseverance. Barbara, where are you? We have to give you a round of applause. Stand up.
You will recognize her from the film.
And I got so carried away that I skipped our biggest impact moment.
Right. We're going to call you back to that. So I'm just gonna...
which is especially exciting. I'll let Paul cue it up, and then I'll tell you why I had to be cheering for this one.
Yeah, this is amazing. If this clicker will just work. Hold on.
What happens when panels get chatty, right? There we
go. So this happened yesterday, and for us, this was absolutely amazing. But I think the true context of this is probably better delivered by Dowda. But this is how the Secretary General of the United Nations chose to end the opening of his address at the SDG Summit.
So when we think about how these activations and these campaigns impact things, it's not only the eyeballs that see it and the hearts and minds that feel it. This is the Secretary General, through his intervention in his speech at the head of the first Sustainable Development Goals Summit, which happened yesterday and finished today. We needed special dispensation to put that picture above him and the rest of the panel members that included the President of the General Assembly, as well as high-level officials as well. He started on the flotilla and he ended on the flotilla with the idea that this is the guide and the northern light of bringing the world together to really, really accelerate action. The idea of it is really around leaving no one behind and coming to the common ground that had been agreed upon by all 193 member states that signed it. And oftentimes people say the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. They're not the UN Sustainable Goals, they're the world's. And
this is very representative of that, because often in these addresses, it's metaphors, it's these statements that are highfalutin, for lack of a better word, and that start becoming really abstract. And the beautiful thing about this is that the SG chose to use something that was an image that all these millions of people around the world, it instantly meant something to them. So what a testament to you guys. But we only have a few minutes to go, and I want to get to a question or two in the room. So can we talk about takeaways from this journey? What are the takeaways for everybody in the room that you want to share?
One of the first takeaways is, if you can, as you're trying to rally people around the goals, this is one of the learnings from this exercise, but it was also, we like to think they're universally applied. Try to look for a passion point to begin with, especially if you have no media money. Try to look for a cultural moment that you can reasonably align yourself to. Now, in this case, that was the arrival of Greta Thunberg. Now, what she has done for putting the world spotlight on climate change is absolutely phenomenal. Climate change is, as we all know, goal 13 of 17 goals. So it made sense for the SDGs to be raised at her sailing in, and the militia and the whole team and Greta herself were very welcoming of that idea. So we found a passion point and we found a cultural moment to be relevant in, and that meant that we didn't have to pay millions and millions of dollars of media money. We were able, with the right idea, to go where the world's attention already was. And that probably leads into my second point, which would be, if you can, these ideas are so complex, but if you can find a concise and inspirational creative idea, it can help your storytelling immensely. For three reasons. It can generate emotion straight away, but if you can fit it on an iPhone as a mock-up image of just a group of sailboats and Greta's boat, then people understand it immediately, they know what you're trying to do, so they know how to help, and by the time you get to the media, if it just works in a simple image, then they can tell the story just as easily.
I think the point that I would add to that is this really was, this came to life through using influence. And, people talk about New York hustle. This was absolutely global hustle. But what's interesting is the influence doesn't necessarily come from the levels that you expect it will come from. So you can start at the highest levels of an organization, and that's generally where people go. But the motivation points for those individuals is profit, politics, power, and their own personal standing. And what we found is we really needed the people. We needed people like Barbara with the passion that just was so deep within them that they couldn't say no, that was just something that they had to be involved in. So I think the real lesson for us is when we do this type of work, we all have to look in some of the dark corners, some of the places that perhaps we wouldn't ordinarily go to ask for help, and we have to ask. And sometimes people will say no, and that doesn't mean we should not ask again. Because we certainly had an instance when we were developing the sails. There was a moment where we had someone on board, and then they got nervous. And they got nervous because this is a wonderful sailing pun. Those winds, they really do change.
Yeah.
And Greta was coming fast, and then she was coming slow, and then she was coming faster, and our timeline was getting crunched. Every single moment there was a knot change in the wind. And so we were only a few days out, really, from needing to have these sails printed. And we had the sails, and all of a sudden we didn't have the partner on board that we needed. But we went back, we reminded them of the significance of this moment and the role that they were going to play in helping to create this. And they came back on board. So don't take no, and use your influence wisely.
Absolutely.
I think when we talk about the New York hustle, and which was phenomenal, like we hear a lot about it on the other side of the world, but when you see it in practice through the sailing community and everybody else, it's amazing. But we also kind of developed very quickly, and we hope this is a learning for other people, you get a sense when you speak to people whether they are a supporter of what you were talking about or whether they are just a supplier. And that's fine if you are just a supplier and a transaction is purely financial, but it does pay to know right out of the gate who you're talking to. And you very quickly develop sort of like a sixth sense for, no, okay, these people are definitely in it for the right reason. And that will help your hustle, whether it's New York or whether it's global. And, you know, Kimberly's point about Barbara, the whole flotilla, Amy Sinclair, and everybody else who jumped on board would be case in point.
So, Dowd, I want you guys to start thinking about questions. We'll have about 7 minutes for that before we have to go right into our next session. But I want to talk about what's next quickly. We want to hear, you sort of identified this incredible cultural moment. You turned it into something spectacular. And there's literally a mock-up of their concept from the beginning that is a photo that looks like it is exactly what we saw on the day. How often does that happen? That's incredible, right? So how do we take this inspiration and this, like, success of this cultural moment and turn it into whatever's next?
I think there are a couple of things. One, you know, the Secretary General yesterday in his speech made a call to action, a very, very direct, explicit call to action. In his remarks, he called on the international community to accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. He called on national leaders and subnational leaders. So think about, you know, presidents, heads of state, heads of government, down to the mayors and local assembly people, to accelerate action, to raise the demand, to raise the supply, and raise the accountability. He made, you know, the third pillar of his call to action was really all other stakeholders. So the private sector, the creative community, academia, media, and individuals. So taking it, you know, the 2030 agenda, taking it from the 30,000, 40,000 foot perspective all the way down to the individual that has a choice in his and her actions on what they're going to do to sort of help implement the SDGs. So really, really taking it from really, really big all the way down and reminding everybody that this is what had been agreed upon, reminding everybody that everyone has a role and responsibility to play in this, and reminding everyone that there's no option but to achieve it and accomplish it. You know, so there's that call to action. We are sort of been thinking a lot and strategizing a lot on how to ladder this up into something more meaningful than the sum of its parts. We've been working with partners, and the next session is actually going to touch on this exactly. It's going to be on the decade of action. 2020 is a very, very big year for obvious reasons. We're going into the last decade before 2030 needs to be accomplished and implemented. It is the anniversary of Beijing plus 25. It's the anniversary of the Conventions of the Rights of the Child. It's the anniversary of Global Compact. It's the anniversary of all of these other things. Paul and Kimberly before were talking about leveraging moments, right? Sometimes you leverage moments that are existing and happening. Sometimes you have to create those moments yourself. And it's really the idea of, you know, in the spirit of what this space is, taking this energy and the energy that's happening outside of here and harnessing it in a way that drives impact.
So with that, actually, that's a great place for us to go to one or two questions before we go into. Any questions for folks? Ooh, then I can just keep chatting with you. Biggest challenge you think people have to prepare for or should anticipate going into this kind of really incredible aspirational activation?
I think if we come back to the amount of no's that you will hear, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted with many people in this room working on years and years of different innovations and incredible developments. It's just like it can bombard you every single day, and we had like a sort of a microcosm of that. I mean, this whole thing was pulled off in 45 days, but you just have to just be prepared for no, 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 and then when you hear terms like that is a hard no, that is a what were some of the other terms that we had? That is a hard stop.
Negativo.
That is a movable.
We got that a couple.
Negativo.
That request will have to go all the way to Capitol Hill. Things like that. You got to kind of smile and go, okay, cool. So what we're hearing is yes, and then somehow work through that, and that's hard. That is like it's brutal, and that's where we're very fortunate because we developed quite a tight-knit crew very quickly, albeit on opposite sides of the world, just to pick each other up and go, no, we can keep doing it. Don't worry, let's keep going. Let's keep going.
I actually want to...
I think something I found really interesting through the process was talking to some of the organisations that we were trying to get on board, certainly through the advertising industry and some of our holding companies. One of the challenges is that a lot of business is currently aligning with a single goal, or perhaps with 2 or 3 goals. And so when it comes to doing all 17, there were a lot of doors closed because it was, the response that often I would get was, we absolutely love the intent, we love what you're trying to do here, but we're all about women.
We're solely this goal.
We're
what
just
an
doing
odd
climate action.
response.
Or people automatically, their reaction is, we've already done enough, or we've already done something, and it's drawing that out and really showing that it needs to be both integrated, and just because it's never been done before doesn't mean it can't be done before, can't be done now.
Also, we're not done till we achieve the 2030 agenda.
Exactly,
right?
And I think other elements of the activation that we've talked about, those of you who've been up on the plaza, the visitors plaza, will see those stripes on the floor of the decal. The idea of that is that everyone coming in should be reminded and have to walk over what had been committed and what we are working towards. And it's just also a mindset shift.
So we have one audience question, but I want to make sure I touch on something that has struck me. Those of you who have been in this space recognize that we've heard some incredible projects here. We've heard innovations from voices we've never heard before, and they are doing literally life-saving work. What do you say when folks talk to you about how, essentially, while this is amazing, isn't it just a marketing campaign? Why is this as important as some of the other things that we've heard?
Well, so our response to that is we work in one of the most influential industries in the world. We write the words that go into the media. We project the images that are strewn across our television screens and through print and social media and all sorts of things like that. We have an absolute responsibility to make sure that we're sharing the right side of information and not just perpetuating all kinds of stereotypes and fodder that has come for so many years beforehand. So yes, we get it all the time. We're not out there saving babies, but every single organisation that we talk to, and we heard it in the former speaker, needs storytellers.
Yeah, and the power is on a spectrum. So last question to you, and then we'll wrap up.
First, I would like to thank you for this panel and everything. And the advice about saying no is great, or about not accepting no is great, but I think it should also be acknowledged that some people, whether they're minorities or female or young, do get no's more often than others. So what would you say, or what advice would you give for that?
Why don't you?
So I think there are different instances, right? When you're reaching for ambition and reaching for impact, I think that's a very, very different context to being told no on something else, which I think you're intimating towards. I think there is a moral imperative in what needs to happen with regard to the implementation of the SDGs, and not accepting that is of the utmost importance, right? To really, really, really drive it. I think my closing point is, I think oftentimes people come to New York thinking that this is the work. We're here, we're in all these meetings, we're hobnobbing, we're making that impact, we're making that perceived impact. The idea is that this is the springboard to the real action. That's not the action. Being here and having the conversations isn't the action that is needed to drive impact. And it's really about figuring out how to do that in the most meaningful ways.
And with that, we've got to transition directly into our next session. So please, huge round of applause for Paul, Kimberly, and Dauda. And don't go anywhere. We are going to do some super fast staging. Get into your seats. We're going to clear this first row. I'll see you guys down there. I'm going to, oh, yeah.